They bombed, they flopped, they were laughed off screens and buried under terrible reviews. But here's the thing nobody tells you. Some of the most visionary films ever made were complete disasters when they first released. 12 movies from the 1990s that audiences absolutely despised are now considered masterpieces. Which one of these do you own on DVD? Number 12. Showgirls, 1995. Let's start with the film that became the punchline of an entire decade. When Showgirls landed in theaters in September 1995, it was the most anticipated adult drama of the year. An NC-17 rated studio film with a massive budget, a rising star in Elizabeth Berkley, and the director of Basic Instinct at the helm. Paul Verhoeven was supposed to be untouchable. Instead, Showgirls became one of the most catastrophic box office disasters in Hollywood history, earning just over $20 million against a $45 million budget and walking away from the Razzie Awards with a record-breaking 7 wins. Critics were merciless. Roger Ebert called it a movie that exploits a lust for the tawdry. Audiences laughed in theaters. Elizabeth Berkley's career was essentially dismantled overnight. For nearly a decade, the film lived in shame. Then something strange happened. Cult screenings began popping up across college campuses in the early 2000s. People started watching it again, not as a guilty pleasure, but as a genuinely fascinating piece of American excess. Academics began writing dissertations on its campy brilliance. Verhoeven himself later said the film was a savage satire of the American dream that audiences simply weren't ready to receive. Today, film scholars debate whether Showgirls is actually a misunderstood feminist critique of exploitation culture, the very industry it appeared to celebrate. Number 11. The Postman, 1997. Kevin Costner had conquered the Western with Dances with Wolves. He had ruled the waterways with Waterworld. So naturally, the world assumed his next epic post-apocalyptic adventure would be another triumph. Instead, The Postman became the film that ended his reign as Hollywood royalty almost overnight. Released in December 1997, the 3-hour saga about a drifter who impersonates a postal worker to inspire hope in a collapsed America cost $80 million and earned back a humiliating $17 million at the domestic box office. The press was savage. Jay Leno turned it into a nightly punchline. Entertainment Weekly placed it on their worst films of the year list. Audiences who did show up walked out confused, bored, or genuinely irritated by its self-serious tone and relentless runtime. But step back 30 years and look at it again. The Postman is, at its core, a deeply earnest meditation on institutional trust, the psychological power of symbols, and what ordinary people will sacrifice to believe in something larger than themselves. In an era obsessed with cynical, irony-drenched storytelling, Costner made something sincerely hopeful. And the culture punished him for it. Recent reassessments from film critics like Matt Zoller Seitz have noted that its themes about the collapse of government systems and the hunger for civic meaning feel more relevant today than they ever did in 1997. Sometimes a film arrives 20 years too early. Number 10. Eyes Wide Shut, 1999. Stanley Kubrick's final film arrived carrying the full weight of 12 years of silence, 2 of Hollywood's biggest stars, and a marketing campaign that promised audiences something dangerous and erotic. What they got instead was a slow, hypnotic, deliberately unsettling psychological labyrinth that refused to give anyone the scandalous thriller they had been promised. The disappointment was immediate and loud. Audiences expecting heat got ice. Critics were divided almost cleanly down the middle. Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman's performances were called wooden, detached, and unconvincing. Kubrick died just 6 days after delivering his final cut to Warner Brothers, leaving behind no commentary, no interviews, no explanations. That silence became part of the film's mythology. Over the following decade, Eyes Wide Shut quietly transformed into one of the most obsessively analyzed films in cinema history. Its dreamlike structure, its Christmas-time dread, its unresolved conspiracy sequences, all of it began attracting serious academic and critical attention. Film scholars started treating it less like a thriller and more like a late-period Kubrick nightmare about marriage, desire, class, and the invisible walls that separate everyday people from systems of power they can never fully access. Today, it is regularly ranked among the greatest films of the 1990s, and its final line of dialogue, delivered by Kidman in one unbroken, unflinching moment, is considered one of the most honest endings in American film history. Number 9. Barton Fink, 1991. The Coen brothers won the Palme d'Or at Cannes for this film. The Palme d'Or, cinema's most prestigious honor. And then American audiences walked into theaters and had absolutely no idea what they were watching. Barton Fink, a fever dream about a New York playwright trapped in a decaying Hollywood hotel, earned just $6 million at the domestic box office and left most viewers deeply confused and more than a little disturbed. The promotional campaign had done the film no favors, failing entirely to communicate what kind of experience audiences were about to have. Mainstream critics in 1991 ranged from mildly impressed to openly bewildered. Many found the film pretentious, others found it impenetrable. What nobody was prepared for was how completely the film rewarded repeat viewing. Barton Fink operates on at least 3 simultaneous levels: as a Hollywood satire, as a supernatural horror film, and as a meditation on creative arrogance and the writer's relationship to suffering they have never personally experienced. John Turturro's performance as a playwright who cannot connect with the very working-class people he claims to champion is one of the decade's most complex and uncomfortable portrayals of intellectual vanity. John Goodman's supporting performance was later recognized as one of his greatest career achievements. Film schools now use Barton Fink as a teaching text. The irony of its initial failure is that it is literally about an artist who fails to understand his own audience. Number 8. A Simple Plan, 1998. Sam Raimi made Evil Dead. Sam Raimi made Darkman. Sam Raimi was not supposed to make a quiet, devastating Midwestern noir about ordinary men destroying each other over a bag of money found in a crashed plane buried in the snow. When A Simple Plan opened in limited release in late 1998, audiences simply did not find it. It made just over $16 million worldwide, a figure that barely registered. Most people had no idea it existed. What critics who did see it understood immediately was that they were watching something extraordinary. Bill Paxton gave the performance of his life as a decent man, watching himself become someone unrecognizable. Billy Bob Thornton received an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor, a fact that genuinely shocked many industry insiders at the time. In the years since, A Simple Plan has been steadily, quietly rehabilitated into one of the most respected thrillers of its decade. Its influence on the Coen brothers' No Country for Old Men has been directly acknowledged. Its examination of how a single moral compromise can cascade into complete destruction feels as sharp and painful today as it did in 1998. The film asks a question it never answers. At what point does a good person become the villain of their own story? The audience carries that weight home with them, and it never fully lifts. That is the mark of an extraordinary film that deserved far more than the silence it received. Number 7. The Iron Giant, 1999. Here is one that should genuinely make you angry. Brad Bird's The Iron Giant, an animated film about a boy who befriends a massive alien robot during the Cold War, arrived in August 1999 with almost zero studio support from Warner Brothers, a confused marketing campaign, and a release date sandwiched between massive summer blockbusters. It earned just $23 million against a $70 million production budget and was considered a devastating failure. Warner Brothers essentially walked away from hand-drawn animation almost entirely as a result. Children who saw it loved it. Most children never got the chance. The rehabilitation of The Iron Giant is one of the most emotionally charged comeback stories in animation history. As those children grew into adults with their own children, the film traveled with them. Its ending, a moment of self-sacrifice delivered with almost no dialogue, just imagery, and a single whispered word, became one of the most referenced emotional scenes in all of animation. Critics who had given it polite reviews in 1999 began writing full retractions. Roger Ebert, who had praised it upon release, went back and elevated it further. Today, it regularly appears on lists of the greatest animated films ever made, and Brad Bird went on to make The Incredibles, a film whose DNA traces directly back to the Iron Giant. The failure of this film remains one of Hollywood's most regrettable and instructive mistakes. Number 6. Safe, 1995. Todd Haynes made one of the most quietly terrifying films of the 1990s, and almost nobody noticed. Safe, starring Julianne Moore as an affluent suburban woman who develops a mysterious and worsening sensitivity to the modern environment around her, played at Sundance and received extraordinary reviews from film critics who understood exactly what they were watching. Then it reached general audiences and essentially vanished. It grossed under $600,000 in North America and was gone before most people even knew it had arrived. The film disturbed people. It was slow. It was clinical. Moore's performance was deliberately stripped of warmth and traditional audience sympathy. There was no clear villain. There was no resolution. That deliberate refusal to comfort its audience was, for most 1990s viewers, simply too much. But Safe has aged into something close to prophetic. Its portrayal of environmental illness, its examination of wellness culture as a response to systemic anxiety, and its absolutely devastating final image. Moore staring at her own reflection in a small mirror in a sealed white igloo, repeating affirmations to herself with dead eyes, now reads as one of the sharpest critiques of American self-help culture ever committed to film. During the global health crisis of the early 2020s, the film experienced a massive critical resurgence, with dozens of major publications declaring it essential viewing. Julianne Moore's performance is now widely considered among the greatest of her career. Haynes made it for almost nothing. It deserved everything. Number 5. The Long Goodbye, 1973. Re-evaluated in the 1990s. Robert Altman's wickedly unconventional take on Philip Marlowe arrived in 1973 and confused audiences into near-total rejection. But the 1990s brought something unexpected, a full critical reappraisal that placed it on countless best-of-decade retrospective lists and introduced it to an entirely new generation of filmmakers who were building the neo-noir landscape of that era. Quentin Tarantino, Paul Thomas Anderson, and the Coen brothers all cited this film. It became one of the defining hidden teacher films of the 1990s independent cinema movement. Elliot Gould's portrayal of Marlowe as a permanently confused, mumbling, morally decent man lost in a world that has moved on without him is now considered one of the most subversive performances in American film history. The film deliberately dismantles every expectation of the hard-boiled detective genre. Marlowe does not win. He does not fully understand what happened. He walks through Los Angeles like a man from a different era, and the city swallows him whole. What audiences in 1973 found insulting, the filmmakers of the 1990s found liberating. The Long Goodbye taught an entire generation of indie directors that genre rules existed to be broken, not lovingly preserved. Its influence on 1990s cinema is immeasurable, even if audiences at the time had no idea they were watching a masterclass in controlled cinematic rebellion. The decade reclaimed it, and film history is richer for that act of reclamation. Number 4. Last Action Hero, 1993. The most expensive movie in Hollywood history at the time of its release, and the film that was supposed to be the crown jewel of Arnold Schwarzenegger's career, turned into the most talked-about disaster of the summer of 1993. Last Action Hero was a self-aware, postmodern deconstruction of the action movie genre before the word postmodern had entered mainstream pop culture vocabulary. It broke the fourth wall, mocked its own conventions, and dared to be genuinely strange in the middle of a popcorn blockbuster. Audiences did not want strange. They wanted Terminator 2 again. The film earned $50 million domestically against a production and marketing spend that some estimates put close to $120 million. Columbia Pictures never fully recovered that summer. The press declared Schwarzenegger finished. Premiere magazine ran a cover story wondering if his reign was over. Here's what nobody predicted. Last Action Hero would become required viewing for an entire generation of film students studying meta-cinema and genre deconstruction. Shane Black's screenplay, which had been significantly rewritten and compromised during production, was recognized as containing ideas that were genuinely ahead of their cultural moment. The film was doing in 1993 what Scream would get celebrated for doing in 1996, dismantling the grammar of a genre from within. Today, action film scholars treat Last Action Hero as a fascinating, flawed, and genuinely daring studio experiment that deserved a far more curious and open-minded audience than the one it received. Number 3. Hudsucker Proxy, 1994. The Coen brothers appear on this list twice, which tells you something important about the 1990s relationship between visionary filmmaking and commercial failure. The Hudsucker Proxy cost $25 million, mostly fronted by Joel Silver, and earned back a staggering $2.8 million at the domestic box office. It stands as one of the most expensive flops in the Coen brothers' career and was widely written off as an overindulgent, visually dazzling, narratively empty exercise in style. Critics in 1994 were not kind. All surface, no soul, wrote more than one reviewer. Tim Robbins was considered miscast. The Capra-esque screwball comedy tone felt out of place in the grunge-era cultural landscape. The film simply did not fit its moment. What those critics missed was the extraordinary technical achievement contained within every single frame. The Hudsucker Proxy is one of the most meticulously crafted studio comedies of its era. A loving, hyper-stylized tribute to 1940s Hollywood that demanded an audience who knew and loved those films. When that audience eventually found it on home video, the response was transformative. Film students discovered it and became obsessed. Cinematography classes used it as a reference text for wide-angle lens work and production design. Roger Deakins' photography is genuinely breathtaking throughout. Today, it is considered one of the most visually inventive comedies the Coen brothers ever made, and its reputation grows with each passing year as more viewers come to it without the weight of 1994's commercial expectations dragging it down. Number 2. Babe, Pig in the City, 1998. The original Babe was a phenomenon, a gentle, beloved family film that earned $254 million worldwide, received 7 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture, and made audiences fall genuinely in love with a talking pig who wanted to be a sheepdog. It was one of the most warmly received films of the 1990s. So when director George Miller, the man behind Mad Max, took over the sequel and delivered something that felt like a fever dream directed by Hieronymus Bosch, the reaction was one of cinema's most dramatic audience betrayals. Babe, Pig in the City opened to confusion, horror, and genuine upset. Parents brought young children expecting the sweetness of the original and received surreal, nightmarish imagery, near-death sequences, and an overwhelming visual assault of urban decay and desperation. The film earned $27 million worldwide against a $90 million budget. Universal Pictures reportedly considered it one of their worst financial disasters of the decade. And yet, film critics who examined the sequel carefully, among them Roger Ebert, who gave it 4 stars and called it a great film that audiences simply refused to see, recognized that George Miller had made something genuinely extraordinary. Babe, Pig in the City is now understood as a dark, compassionate, strikingly original fable about the vulnerable and dispossessed in an indifferent world. Its visual imagination rivals anything produced by Hollywood in the 1990s. It is darker than the original because it is truer than the original. Number 1. Blade Runner, 1982. Final cut reevaluated across the 1990s. No film on this list tells a more complete story about the gap between initial reception and eventual legacy. Ridley Scott's Blade Runner arrived in 1982 to modest box office returns and deeply divided reviews. Many critics found it cold, slow, and emotionally inaccessible. Audiences expecting a Star Wars-style adventure left theaters puzzled and dissatisfied. The studio had famously forced Harrison Ford to record a voice-over narration because they did not trust audiences to follow the story, a decision Ford himself vocally despised and that Scott found artistically devastating. But through the 1980s, Blade Runner lived on VHS. Film students watched it. Cyberpunk writers treated it as a foundational text. By the time the 1990s arrived, an entire cultural conversation about artificial intelligence, identity, corporate dystopia, and what it means to be human had placed Blade Runner at its absolute center. The 1992 director's cut, which removed the studio-mandated narration and altered the ending, was released to extraordinary critical response. So which one of these flopped masterpieces genuinely surprised you? Drop it in the comments. I want to know which film on this list you think still doesn't deserve its second-chance reputation, and which one you believe Hollywood owes a real apology for abandoning. And here's the question that should keep you up tonight. If audiences were this wrong about these 12 films, what are we getting catastrophically wrong about the movies releasing right now?